Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So nothing on the agenda for today. I'll just quickly mention that I'll go on PTO starting tomorrow until January, but I will still join these calls. Uh, I'm mentioning this because this is actually like a positive thing in a way. I was thinking then that I might be able to assist you better with those deliverables on the diags and stuff that we wanted to have until the summit, if you remember. So because of this, I might actually go into the diag code and all of that and already the reviews and stuff, so we have them done.
Okay, I've got concerns about PTO and you doing that, but we can talk.
Well, this is the extra project, right?
I understand.
So it's like open source stuff. In the meantime, does anyone have any status items that you want to raise up for today? I think we're gonna end up early, like at the half-hour mark, due to the Thanksgiving thing. Status going once, going twice.
Just one quick thing. We did fix one of the problems with PCI LMT that had to do with the Broadcom device and not being able to reset. Everything seems to be working fine now. We integrated in our flow as well.
Cool. Thanks so much, Cisco. All right. So
so one more thing, mem tester. I'm still waiting on the pull request update. Right, but it's not urgent.
I will get to that as soon as possible. As I just mentioned earlier, I will have more time for that. That's on me. Sorry about that. All right. Dan, you wanna refresh us a bit on the HWI discussion?
Yeah, we were discussing basically what we use the HWI for. In the last meeting, we kind of went through what the APIs look like and things like that. And where we left off was basically saying, hey, it's a cool thing, but it's one more sort of barrier to entry to writing a diag in the OCP diagnostic format, right? And then I think the sort of where we left the discussion was at Google, we have this requirement for persistent hardware naming where the hardware sort of indicator or location ID stays the same regardless of how the device is populated. So like drives don't pop around and things like that as we change the layout of the machine. And this aligns very, very closely with what the service label is in the DMTF specification, right? It's the same idea there of labeling the hardware. I think the final sort of comment that we had made was that if Redfish and sort of that device management tree were further along when we had started Diags originally, we probably wouldn't even need something like this, right? That probably would be the solution. But this is sort of where we are today as we're in this transitory period. And I think maybe the final point that we didn't say that's worth saying is if we do go and provide this backend, we would have to discuss whether or not it's sort of like a requirement for a diag. And my initial, gut feeling would be no, that it's not a requirement. But I think that's kind of where we left off.
So here's a quick question on what you just said. If we were, so we're not putting this as a requirement, right? Because at the end of the day, the spec just says identify the location of your hardware, whatever you see fit, right? In whatever way works for you. Is it so for backwards compatibility reasons? Do you think it would be useful to make an enum or a kind of label to say, okay, this location identifier comes from HWI in the context of later on, maybe we replace that recommendation with DMTF?
It's possible. I was thinking sort of along the lines of you as well, like having an enum for like what type of location identifier is this? I can't remember exactly what we call that field right now in the hardware info, right? But something along those lines to say that this is a redfish indicator, this is a like random indicator, it's a logic ID. We'd have to figure out what those enums would be so that the consuming system could, basically make some sense out of it, right?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is encode that into the identifier itself. So like say DMTF colon whatever or something like that. Otherwise we need to add a new field, and adding a new field means an RFC for the spec, and it's a bit more involved.
It would, but I think honestly, adding like a prefix to the field for things that are consuming it now, like for things that expect that to be a serial number or expect that to be what we call a dev path, would probably break more things actually than changing the spec. Adding the fields are usually easy. It's when we go and, sort of change a field or remove one that we break things.
Yeah, but adding a field also introduces maintenance load.
It certainly does, yeah.
All right. Well, I personally think that adding this field with the type of the identifier is fine, and we can deprecate it later on if we get to the point of saying, okay, redfish is now ready to use in this context.
Yeah, I would be curious, maybe a quick poll of different folks for folks that are sort of all in on redfish, or folks that are exploring it, or I don't even know what a redfish is. Is that like a Dr. Seuss thing, or what? Just sort of where the room is on that? Is anyone using redfish today aside from Google?
Yes, it's used a lot inside HP and places like that. It is a yeah. I don't want to say anything. It's being recorded.
For BMC, we use Redfish as well. Whether it's open or not open BMC, that's the interface that we request to be worked.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like we do have some alignment at least around redfish. It looks like it's gaining. It seems like it has positive momentum, right? If nothing else.
So there is one more thing on this. HWI has a redfish backend, right?
It does.
So how would that be different from just saying, okay, always use HWI generated identifiers, and this uses redfish as a backend?
So our backend right now for redfish depends on another piece of data, which we call UHM, which is the Unified Hardware Modeling Language, that actually makes that ID unique. So we kind of take that redfish service label, the redfish chassis ID, and then we do some magic with it to create the universal ID. So our redfish backend depends on one more thing, but I think you can turn that off. I would actually need to talk to Shufeng here. I think you can say, no, just use vanilla redfish, and in which case that should just work.
Yeah, and in a sense, this would eliminate a need for a new field, if you think about it.
Yeah, and actually now that I think about it too, I know it just works because I know that we use it on HP devices where we don't have UHM models. So I've actually answered my own question.
All right, so I've added a thing to the agenda to start a discussion or RFC on this, and we can continue there, right?
Yeah, the one possible exception right now is storage devices. There's sort of a gap at the moment for legacy storage devices like SATA drives and things like that in Redfish. So that's one thing that I know is a gap at the moment. I think NVMe drives and more modern drives are okay, but there's a problem here that we have to deal with, which is one of the reasons why we have like multiple backends for some DIACs.
All right, so the redfish discussion may occur later on once things get more stable. For now, we're talking about the HWI as the proposal to populate those location identifiers, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that makes it sort of tactical for us is, we want to use your particular implementation of the OCP specification, the pure Python specification. So then the question becomes to us is, you know, how do we bring in the HWI if we want to do that? And the other discussion that we were having last week, now that this kind of jogs my memory, is do we bring it as a library, in which case you got Python bindings and all kinds of other things, or the sidecar service, right? The sidecar service has a lot of appealing, you know, properties, but it makes the diag, you know, non-hermetic, right? Which is also undesirable, because now you need sort of like another thing in addition to the diag, like a service that needs to be there as a dependency.
So I have some notes on this, and I wanted to get into this topic. By the way, Dan, it's not your Python, it's this group's Python, so it's ours.
Fair enough.
So I actually find the sidecar option very appealing. It does have some downsides, right? It needs a stable version, so it needs versioning, right? It needs a protocol to talk to it, whatever transport that will be on, so like a socket or Linux, Unix socket. But there is an advantage with the version, by the way. The cardinality of the sidecar is less than the diags, because multiple diags could use the same version of the sidecar, right?
That is true.
Then again, you also get into dependency hell, but you know, one problem at a time.
Yeah.
But the positives are it is language agnostic and build system agnostic, right? So you can compile this as its own thing and deploy it, and it works. Granted, the diag has a dependency now on it to exist on the machine, or maybe off host if the transport permits. But the language agnostic, I think, is quite a big requirement right now, based on the protobuf C++ boundary, right?
Yeah, I think.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's fair. That's accurate.
And then the diags can be smaller as a result of extracting this to a different package. I don't know how relevant that is. Maybe it is for some people. The other thing that I think it is very salient is a security model for it. I think I would phrase it this way. This HWI layer, whatever it is, may need higher priority access to the hardware that you don't normally get access to. So if you put it in the diag, the diag needs that higher priority access inherently. But if it's a separate component, the security ACL model for that component can be individual from the diag. So the diag, let's say, only touches the drives or whatever, but the HWI can also go into other things that have higher security clearance on the machine. What do you think about this benefit?
We might be a special case. I think Kieran can keep me honest here. Almost all of our diags at the moment run in some type of very privileged mode, because they're sort of exclusively executed when we run them. If we ever get to like a brave future where we have like hardware diagnostics running alongside, you know, user work, it could be a compelling feature, but I don't know that we have that yet.
We have that. So we may need diagnostics that run as health checks on a live system that are non-intrusive, and therefore you cannot run them in a high privilege mode. So anyway, the point is the separation of security boundary is relevant as well as the language one. So personally getting, towards the sidecar thing.
Okay. Let me go back and let me talk to the team and see how they would feel taking our HWI right now and then wrapping it up as a sidecar and then seeing if it makes sense to even break it out of the existing implementation we've got right now. And then I think the other question would be is, our existing HWI is still returning whatever we called the hardware infos before we called them hardware infos, right? They're returning that old shape as opposed to the new shape.
No, I guess that's a reasonable update to do. More on the complicated side would be the protocol specification, because you need to talk to it through some transport, and then you need a protocol.
Yeah, for us, that's going to be Proto and RPC, which just hasn't seemed desirable by many, right?
Yeah, that's a discussion itself. You were mentioning some design docs the last time that you want to sanitize and share, and where you have analyzed these versions as well.
Yeah, I was actually just looking for that as we were having a discussion. I was just going to speak to it verbally, but I'm actually having trouble finding it. And then we actually had the exact same discussion, almost verbatim, regarding another communication interface we have called CMI. So I was looking for that document, and I can't find it either. Kieran, do you happen to have a link to that so we could just kind of speak to the whole library versus sidecar?
You're referring to the CMI discussion or the ones which for
It
the
was the CMI discussion that our friends in IngeProd had put together is where I remember seeing the table.
Yeah, I just shared with you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So while you're looking for that, I want to highlight a bit the goal in this discussion is to get sort of at least a provisional kind of agreement as to how we go forward with this, right? Because obviously this is a valuable piece of software that would be beneficial, but we need to make a model that works for everyone. I would still start the discussion on GitHub so that we have a text form of the arguments, and maybe you can put stuff out of those documents there. But while we have that, we can still have this verbal discussion right now.
One thing I wanted to mention is this sidecar versus library thing is something which we have discussed in multiple contexts within Google. And in the context of our own stuff, the sidecar seemed less desirable, basically because the library is changing a lot more rather than being relatively stable. Downsides are in terms of visibility. That's one more thing to debug. We don't have clear, it's not like you have a stack trace to debug quickly. So it's another service. So for what it's worth, it comes with its downsides. At least in a couple of cases, we have sort of decided to go with a library approach, just FYI. It's not that it's the same things are not probably relevant here, but FYI.
No, that's a good point, Kieran. So my question from last time was whether we can have both versions. So a library so that you can couple the lifetime of the code with the diag if you want to provide those as a single package, but also if that library can be put into a sidecar and compiled individually, and the sidecar comes with the protocol and transport and all of that, and that is stable enough so that we don't need debugging in production, because at the end of the day, it's supposed to be like a single unit providing this service of identifying the hardware for you, right? So that's stable enough, and then that gets published for users that can depend on it at runtime.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. And I think in fact, the doc which Dan is mentioning, we started off as a companion service, but we have sort of pivoted to being a library. So it's yeah, essentially putting that library into a live service. I think it's very doable, and that's an open. I mean, we can do that, I think, technically.
No,
Yeah.
we see on screen share then.
Yeah, I can-
Ironically, it is exactly what we're discussing. So.
It is, right? And we have this discussion every time we go down one of these rat holes on this topic, right? But, you know, we all kind of have the library, the companion service, or sort of the long running daemon that lives outside of things, right? We kind of looked at it from the perspective of the resource costs, right? What does it take to run? Here, I'm kind of I don't know that I feel that this is compelling either way, right? But there's some small downside to the sidecar service, right? Multi-language support, we think we can get there with anything. I do think that the sidecar service or the companion service is a little bit easier. I know that in my experience, all of the Python bindings are great until they don't work, and then they can be very difficult to debug. To me, this is the most compelling part: is the release of how do you release them together. I really do think that there's a lot of benefit in having the two things released as a sort of monolithic package, right? That being said, that's not a universally shared opinion, right? But just being on the side of broken diags, that's the thing that I kind of like.
So if we have both, and like the library could be made in such a way that you can also release it as a stable sidecar, then this is no longer a pain point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, I can't disagree with that. And then when we get down to stability, right, this kind of goes into the whole release discussion as well, right? The independent thing I think is easier to test, right? But I do have some concerns on the open source side of this. Like when we're testing it internally against, you know, our 10,000 configs or whatever it is, right? It's a huge problem, but it's a tractable problem, right? Whereas sort of testing it against every possible.
What did you say? Tractable?
Yeah, it's doable, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but externally trying to verify it works on, you know, everything in the world. I honestly don't know how we would do that.
I mean, we have this problem with everything.
I suppose that's true, right? Like I always come back to like the Linux kernel and I think, well, they do it somehow. And then, you know, I remember that they have 10,000 contributors or something like that, right?
Just a random thought on that. On the last item you were showing, the stability. So the sidecar would just act as a distribution mechanism in this case. And what I'm thinking is, if the library is versioned and you say, okay, version 0, 0.1, 1.0, whatever, can go into a sidecar deployment and is stable as is with its protocol interface and everything. But individually, the library can develop on its own for whatever reasons. And in specific diags, where you use the library as compiled in, you use the latest code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it probably does. There's maybe one other thing to think about as well is, you know, the HWI in many cases, except in the case of Redfish, is like a wrapper on top of other things. And, you know, obviously those things move independently as well.
Can they be packaged as a nice single package?
Probably, but I think we would have to go back and look to do sort of like a walk the tree and figure out what the dependencies are, because I got a feeling we're not the only people relying on those dependencies, right? Now, a lot of them I do know, and they are remarkably stable. You know, there are things like Smart CTL, which I don't think has changed in, you know, many years, right? But there's going to be some that probably do change a little bit.
All right, but they would be documented anyway. It sounds like external dependencies.
Yeah, there's cases too where we do just like dumb parsing of things, and I know that those do break across operating systems. I know that like Fedora LSPCI looks a little bit different than Ubuntu LSPCI and things like that.
Okay, so we're at the 30-minute mark. Do you want to continue this discussion on a GitHub forum discussion thing, and
Yeah.
we can enumerate all of the benefits and downsides? It sounds to me like it does require some non-trivial amount of work to
It is
open source.
non-trivial for sure, right? And I don't even worry about the upfront work. I worry about the sustaining work more than anything, right? I don't want to like just throw it over the wall if we did it, and I think it is kind of hard to keep in sync. I do have one quick question before we break. I was wondering, I apologize for changing the subject abruptly. Young, did you have any updates on your side for the virtual client stuff?
No, I don't. Sergey hasn't reached out to me this week, so but yeah, once he start onboarding, I'll work with him.
Okay, sounds good. He may be this week. I'm not sure. Cool. Okay, thanks everybody. And for the folks in the US, have a great holiday. And Adrian, you enjoy your PTO, man. It sounds like it's a good chunk of time there you have.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. See you guys.
See ya. Bye.
Yeah, thanks everyone.